Hi, I'm OZ Hall. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. This video documents how to sample a synthesizer on an AKAI MPC. Specifically, I'll be sampling on the AKAI MPC Live II using the MPC 2.15.1 firmware. This will cover both MIDI and CV gate control of a modular synth. In this video, I'll create an analog bass drum sound on my Behringer ARP 2500 modular system. I'll sample the sounds to preserve all of the fine adjustments that I made to dial in the sound. First, I'm going to recap my modular journey. Initially, I had to create a patch only to lose it when the next patch was needed. Now I'm able to capture a patch by sampling it. The sample becomes a part of my library of samples rather than being lost to time. Feel free to skip to the next chapter if you're not interested in this detail. I built my first DIY synthesizer from a kit in the late 1970s. Later, I purchased an Aries mixer module kit to expand my ARP Odyssey synthesizer. I also purchased a number of blank panels from Aries. I still have that modular, which was expanded into the early 80s using both original designs and kits built on the SSM and Curtis chips, which were used in the Prophet 5. At some point in the mid-80s, I completely abandoned using this modular. It was just too time-consuming and unproductive relative to the synthesizers with presets like the Prophet 5 and the DX7. Flash forward about 25 years and the powerful organic analog sound began to be appreciated again. I began to acquire some synthesizers.com 5-view modules. I also worked on a number of custom modules which would allow me to create presets on that modular. After about 10 years of purchasing or building synthesizer modules, I had acquired quite an arsenal of modular gear. The preset concept had worked, but there was little to no way to get all the modules under preset control. So once again, I was faced with the time investment for patching and tweaking a modular. I still had no way to preserve the fruits of that labor. Once I purchased a Prophet X sampler, it was possible to sample the modular. I did a few samples, but it was a bit labor intensive. There was sampling software available to expedite the process, but I never invested the $300 to purchase it. A few years ago, I purchased a used Korg Electribe sampler. This allowed me to do basic sampling. I liked it so well that I began to look for a state-of-the-art sampling solution. Enter the AKAI MPC Live II. The unit allowed me to control external synthesizers using both MIDI and CV gate interfaces. The sampling software built into the MPC allowed me to create multi-samples using both a series of different pitches as well as up to 4 layers of velocity. So that's how I got to this point. The first step in sampling a modular is creating a sound that's worth sampling. I created this Simmons-like analog kick drum sound. If you're not listening with decent headphones, you'll miss the low-end detail in this sound. Let's take a listen. The patch has 2 layers. The first is simply a square wave that is frequency modulated by an envelope generator. Let's listen to just the square wave. The second layer is white noise through a 1047 multimode filter. I'm using the 12 dB per octave low-pass output with no resonance. The filter is controlled by its own envelope. Let's listen to just the noise. The 2 layers are mixed in the 1006 Filt amp. The filter is wide open with no resonance, so I'm basically using only the VCA portion of the Filt amp module. The VCA is controlled by its own envelope. and we'll listen one more time. The next step is setting up the MPC to control the modular. I've created a template using 2 tracks to control the modular and a third to contain the sample sound. Track 1 uses CV gate output to control the modular. I want to point out the physical CV gate connection between the MPC and the modular. The 2 things to note are the 3.5-inch stereo to mono breakout. Let's look at one of those cables. You have the stereo connector and it gets broken out into tip and ring. The black connector is the tip, which contains CV1. The red connector is the ring, which contains CV5. I'm using CV1 as the keyboard control voltage output. CV5 is the gate output. I have a convention of using yellow patch cables for keyboard control voltage and green patch cables for gates. These cables connect to the modular to control it. And while we're back here, this is the output of the modular plugged into input number 1, and that's the audio that we're going to sample. Also note that we have MIDI in, MIDI in, MIDI out, and there are a couple of USB connectors that can, among other things, connect directly to class compliant MIDI over USB devices. So we're back to the display, and in this template we have track 1, which will connect to the CV and gate output. We also have track 2, which will connect to MIDI, and track 3, which will be the container for our key group, which we'll create with the sampling software. I want to point out a few parameters here. So we've got track 1, which is a CV type track, and we've got program 1, which defines which CV connectors we'll use, and in particular, the notes will be controlled from CV1 and the gates will be controlled from CV5. Going to track 2, we have a MIDI track, and there's the track type, and over here this is where we would tell it which MIDI device to connect to. And we'll come back to track 3, which is where we're going to contain our key group with the samples after we create them. We're now ready to go to the sampler page to do our auto sampling. We'll start on track 1 because that's the track which controls the modular using CV and gate. By the way, note that the program is a type key group, not drum. We hit Shift Mix to get to the sampler. We're going to ask the auto sampler to trigger the modular over a 2-octave range. We want to capture the sound at every 3 semitones. Let's look in more detail at the parameters. First, let me point out that the input is input 1, and we could change this to any of the 4 inputs. And we don't want 1 and 2 or 3 and 4 because we're going to sample this mono. So we have input 1 mono. We want to hear the sample just to be sure everything's correct. We hear it and we can see that the level is good. Next, we want to go to the auto sampler page, and we're going to scroll to the top of that page, and you see it's gotten the sample source information, including the control and the program, from our track. The note range is from C1 to C3. That's our 2-octave range. We're going to sample every 3 notes, and we're only going to use 1 velocity layer. We're going to be sampling for a length of 2,000 milliseconds with a tail of 500 milliseconds. And this is our program. We're going to change the name to something meaningful. You can't really read this, but it says Z Simmons Kick. We select Do It, and again, you can't read it, but there's the name. And the looping is off because this is a one-shot. We're going to auto trim the start. We don't want to make this the current program because we don't want to overlay the program on our track 1. We will let it create its own program, and we'll find it and assign that program to track 3. So I'm going to click Do It, and the auto sampler's off and running. And you can hear it begin to change pitch. We're in the tom range now. Okay, so we can go to track 3, and we can go to the program name, and there's our program, Z Simmons Kick. And now we can play it from the pads. And one thing we need to do is we need to go adjust the envelope, and we're going to do that by going to Menu, and we're going to Program Edit. We want the amp envelope. Be sure you are not on the filter or the pitch envelope. The amp envelope, we want to make sure that we're on all for the sample. We don't want individual samples here. We want to hit all of them. Also, if you want to, you can do all layers at a time. This is kind of meaningless since we've only got one layer, but we'll turn that on anyway. And now we can adjust this release. And we want to tighten that up just a little bit. So we've now adjusted the amp envelope, and we can go back to main and play our kick drum sound. And if we get it high enough, it sounds like a tom. The only other thing we want to do at this point is we want to go to the main menu. We want to, actually, let's see if we can do that from here. We want to save the current program, and it's already got the name. I've got my own area where I like to save these programs, and I've got my orig programs, and I'm going to save this Z Simmons Kick, and it saves all of the waves and the key group. And I'm ready to pull that into another project as a whole unit and use it as either a kick drum or an electronic Simmons type tom. If you're still watching, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. By the way, when auto-sampling on the MPC, the only difference between using the CV gate interface and using the MIDI interface is, number one, the physical connection via MIDI over USB or a 5-pin DIN MIDI cable, and number two, switching to track 2, which is a MIDI type track which connects over the physical USB or MIDI cable. The auto sampling would be exactly the same, just starting with track 2. So at this point, we've successfully captured the modular analog drum sound over a 2-octave range. It could be used for either a kick drum or a series of toms. It is saved as an MPC program, which can easily be loaded into another project. We can now repatch the modular and do a completely different sound. So do you prefer presets or doing your own patching each time you use your synth? Also, do you create your own samples? If so, what platform are you using? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.